What do you mean Tiffany will own the company? My voice sounded steady, but my hands tightened into fists beneath the table. The elegant chandelier hanging above cast a warm glow over our dinner, yet the atmosphere had turned icy cold. My father, Walter Langston, the same man whose company I'd rescued from ruin, barely looked up from his steak. "Grace, let's face facts," he sighed, as if speaking to a child. "You're brilliant at technical work, but leadership isn't your strength. We need someone who commands respect. Tiffany is the obvious choice." Tiffany sat directly across from me, her designer dress flawless, sipping wine with a confident, smug smile. She had done nothing when Langston Enterprises faced collapse. Now, with the company thriving due to my work, she was being handed everything. "I created the software that saved this company," I responded sharply, my voice breaking through the sound of silverware hitting plates. "Without it, you'd have no company left to give away." My father chuckled lightly, amused by my frustration. Casually, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and tossed a crumpled $100 bill onto the table. "For your efforts," he said dismissively. I stared at the $100 bill resting near my untouched glass of wine. $100 for the years I'd spent coding until dawn, the sleepless nights analyzing financial reports, and creating the very system that transformed Langston Enterprises from near bankruptcy to a $600 million giant. $100. Mom shifted uncomfortably, casting a hesitant glance my way, but remaining silent. Everyone was silent. My eyes returned to my father, the man I had admired and spent my life desperately trying to impress. At that moment, clarity washed over me. It had never been about hard work, innovation, or loyalty. It was about control. "I see," I finally whispered, quieter than intended. Calmly, I picked up the $100 bill, folded it into my napkin, and stood. "Grace, don't be dramatic," Dad said with a dismissive wave. I smiled softly, feeling oddly peaceful. "I'm not being dramatic. Clearly, my role in this family is a background character. So, I'll exit the scene." Tiffany laughed softly, barely hiding her enjoyment. "Grace," Mom began gently, but I was already leaving. My heels clicked firmly against the marble floor as I walked out, not shouting, not slamming doors, simply exiting. The next morning, I arrived at work early as usual. Langston Enterprises had transformed remarkably over the past year. Previously, it had been a place filled with anxiety, whispers of layoffs, and resignations. But now, thanks to my software, we were leading the industry. Our automated systems turned weeks of logistics work into mere minutes, and we had expanded internationally with major clients. Yet, today something felt off. Employees exchanged nervous glances. Conversations suddenly hushed as I passed by. Reaching my office, I saw the door already open. My desk was empty, my computer gone, and even the nameplate reading Grace Langston, CTO, was missing. Tiffany sat comfortably in my chair, flipping through papers casually. She looked up with a bright, artificial smile. "Oh, good morning, Grace. Didn't Dad tell you? I'll be moving into this office, and you'll report directly to me now," Tiffany announced casually. My stomach dropped, but my face remained calm. "What's my new position?" I asked evenly. Tiffany shrugged, as if it hardly mattered. "We'll figure something out. Maybe IT support." IT support, at my own company, the one I'd single-handedly saved. She smirked lightly. "Dad actually suggested you take some time off, relax a bit. Maybe work on some hobbies. Don't worry, you'll still have some role here." I took a slow, steady breath, feeling my heartbeat pounding loudly in my ears. After all my sacrifices, late nights, and the countless solutions I developed, they were casting me aside, treating me like I was worth no more than the $100 bill my father had mockingly tossed at me. I glanced at Tiffany, then at the Langston Enterprises logo etched onto the glass outside my office. Once it had represented family, loyalty, and legacy. Now it symbolized nothing but betrayal. Yet I didn't protest or argue. I simply nodded, understanding perfectly. Then, with quiet dignity, I turned and left. They believed they'd won, expecting me to fade quietly into obscurity. But as the elevator doors closed behind me, I made a promise to myself. They had no idea what was coming next. The next day, I returned to the company and took my place at the small desk they'd placed me at, tucked away in a corner alongside interns who had no idea who I was. I didn't resist. Instead, I quietly observed. Within days, it became clear Tiffany was struggling. She knew nothing about running a multi-million-dollar company, spending her time in endless meetings, ignoring crucial data, and replacing experienced managers with her inexperienced friends. Soon, the company was once again on the edge of disaster. Everything I'd built was unraveling before my eyes, prompting me to make a bold decision. If Langston Enterprises didn't value me, I'd create something better. Late one evening, I met secretly with 3 of the best minds I'd ever worked with. Willie, our former CFO, who'd skillfully navigated the company out of crippling debt. Amber, a top data analyst who had built our customer insight systems from scratch. And Kenneth, my closest collaborator and our lead engineer, who understood the software as deeply as I did. All 3 had quietly resigned recently, recognizing the impending collapse. Willie leaned in, his voice serious. "Grace, what's your plan?" I slid a folder onto the table, revealing months of careful, secret preparations. "We're starting fresh," I said simply, confident they would join without hesitation. Tiffany and my father had overlooked one critical detail: the software. Langston Enterprises might own it legally, but they could never truly replicate it without me. But the truth was, I had created the original code long before I ever introduced it at Langston Enterprises. The most advanced version, with all its new features, was still mine. I had never uploaded it to their servers. For the next month, I worked quietly, enhancing and perfecting my software, making it stronger and faster. Once ready, I didn't approach Langston Enterprises. Instead, I went straight to their competitors. Within 2 weeks, I had multiple offers on the table. By month's end, I'd secured a deal, a $90 million contract. I wasn't just entering the competition with my father's company. I was about to bring them down entirely. The first sign of trouble for Langston Enterprises was subtle, yet impactful. A longtime client suddenly ended their contract, followed quickly by others. Tiffany panicked, firing people randomly and placing blame everywhere but herself. But the reality was simple. The industry had moved forward, and my new, superior software was now powering their competitors. Langston Enterprises had become outdated practically overnight, and I was only beginning. 7 months later, I sat comfortably in the elegant ballroom of a luxury hotel, champagne glass in hand, attending the prestigious Tech Innovators Gala. This event attracted the industry's elite, CEOs, executives, and investors, and this year, I was the honored guest. When my name was announced, I stood and confidently walked onto the stage, greeted by enthusiastic applause. The host introduced me proudly. "Tonight, we honor Grace Langston, creator of revolutionary logistics software transforming global businesses. Her company, Axion Systems, is now valued at over $900 million. The applause echoed loudly through the room. As my eyes scanned the crowd, I noticed a familiar face, my father, seated near Tiffany at the back. Their expressions reflected defeat. Langston Enterprises was once again near collapse, and they knew it. I smiled, not with bitterness or revenge, but with satisfaction. I had finally understood the lesson they unintentionally taught me. I didn't need their approval or support. I'd achieved success on my own terms, and this time there was nothing they could do about it. Exactly 1 year had passed since that humiliating dinner when my father had thrown a mere $100 bill on the table, dismissing my efforts, and Tiffany had smugly accepted control. 1 year since I'd left quietly, determined to prove them wrong. Now, leading Axion Systems and reviewing our latest quarterly report, I couldn't help but smile. Our revenue was soaring at $600 million, with our market share growing steadily, while Langston Enterprises struggled, losing clients and money at a rapid pace. The moment I'd anticipated arrived precisely at 9 a.m. when my assistant announced, "Grace, your father and sister are here to see you." I took a deep breath, knowing this day would eventually come. "Send them in," I said calmly. Tiffany entered, looking exhausted despite her expensive attire, followed by my father, who seemed older and utterly defeated. They had finally realized they had lost. They knew it. "Grace," my father started carefully, "we need to talk." I calmly gestured to the chairs in front of my desk. They paused briefly, perhaps realizing for the first time they were in my territory. Eventually they sat. Tiffany fidgeted, tapping her nails nervously, avoiding eye contact. My father sighed deeply. "Look, we've had our disagreements, but we're still family. Langston Enterprises is in serious trouble, and we need your help." There it was. I allowed silence to linger, letting them feel uncomfortable before finally responding. "And what exactly do you expect me to do?" Dad leaned forward, earnest now. "We're prepared to offer you a significant leadership position. Clearly, we underestimated your abilities." I raised an eyebrow. "You realize that now?" Tiffany finally spoke up, irritation evident in her voice. "Grace, stop being petty. We're asking for your help." I laughed softly. "You need me? That's interesting because a year ago I wasn't leadership material according to you. You said I was only good for technical tasks." Dad frowned, clearly frustrated. "Decisions were made, Grace. But right now we need to move forward. With your help, we can rebuild Langston Enterprises together." Control, again, that's what they wanted, not my skills, not my vision, just control. Feigning curiosity, I asked, "What role exactly are you offering me?" Dad straightened up confidently. "Second in command, directly under Tiffany." I couldn't help myself. I laughed, louder this time. Tiffany's face flushed red with anger. "Grow up, Grace. Creating software doesn't mean you're capable of running a large company." I stopped laughing and leaned in, making sure my voice was ice cold. "Tiffany," I said calmly, "my company is worth $900 million, while yours is about to collapse. Remind me, who doesn't know how to run a company?" Silence. Beautiful, perfect silence. Dad tried one last approach, his voice nearly pleading. "Grace, please." That was the moment I had waited for. The man who once dismissed and belittled me was now begging for my help. And I felt nothing but peace. "No," I said firmly. Tiffany stood abruptly, furious. "You're just bitter. You've always been jealous of me." I smiled gently, amused. "Jealous? Tiffany, I have everything you ever wanted. I don't need jealousy." I stood slowly, straightening my blouse calmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a real company to run." Dad left without another word, clearly angry. Tiffany stormed towards the door but paused, turning back to face me one last time. "I hope you're happy," she spat. I looked her directly in the eyes, utterly calm and sincere. "I am." The door closed behind her. I sat back down and exhaled slowly, feeling genuinely free for the first time. They thought an empty apology could fix everything. They thought they knew who I was, but they had no idea who I'd become. But as satisfying as it was to see them squirm, I knew this story wasn't over. Langston Enterprises was going under, and when a ship sinks, it drags everything with it. The question was, would I let that happen? 4 days later, the answer arrived in bold headlines across business magazines, tech forums, and national news outlets. Langston Enterprises declares bankruptcy. A $600 million empire crumbles overnight. How family ego and poor leadership destroyed Langston Enterprises. Each article told the same story, and everyone credited the company's past success to me. It was clear. The only reason Langston had survived its first near collapse was because of the software I created, and once I was out, its downfall was inevitable. I was in a meeting when my assistant, Marilyn, knocked on the door. "Grace, you'll want to see this," she said, handing me a printed report. As I read the final paragraph, a small smirk tugged at my lips. Langston Enterprises was being liquidated. Everything was up for sale, the headquarters, remaining assets, even the company name. My father, desperate to save the sinking ship, had taken out enormous loans. Now the banks were taking everything back. and I could buy it all. That evening, from the comfort of my penthouse overlooking the city skyline, I thought about what I wanted. I had already won. I'd proven myself. Did I really need to crush them further? Then I remembered that dinner a year ago. The moment my father tossed a crumpled $100 bill at me like a tip for a waitress. Like I was nothing. My decision was made. The next morning, I didn't hide behind lawyers or investors. I didn't use a third party. I wanted them to know exactly who was reclaiming the pieces of their broken empire. So I called the bankruptcy attorney directly. I'd like to place a bid on all Langston Enterprises assets, I said, including the name. There was a pause. Miss Langston, are you aware what that means? I smiled. Perfectly. 1 week later, I sat in the very boardroom my father once ruled like a king. Only this time, I was the one wearing the crown. The final contracts lay before me, and the pen rested elegantly on top. With one signature, the entire company, everything he refused to let me lead, would be mine. Tiffany and my father sat across from me. Their faces were pale, their pride stripped away. Dad looked 14 years older than he had just a week before. Tiffany couldn't even look at me. I still can't believe you're doing this, she muttered. Doing what? I asked. Buying a failed company. Acquiring a name that's now worthless. She glared. You know what I mean. I leaned back in my chair, fingers tapping gently on the polished table. Funny. A year ago, I was just technical. Not capable of running a company. And now you think I have too much power. Dad sighed heavily. Grace, just sign the damn papers. I picked up the pen, held it for a moment, then slid the documents back across the table. He blinked. Tiffany frowned. What is this? A counteroffer, I said. He read the first page, his expression changing from confusion to disbelief. You're dissolving Langston Enterprises? Tiffany gasped. You're shutting it down? I smiled. That's right. My father's voice rose. Why would you do that? I met his eyes with calm clarity. Because I never needed Langston Enterprises. But you did. And you threw me away. Now, I was walking away on my terms with everything and nothing left to prove. But I did want one final thing. I pointed to a small clause at the bottom of the last page. My father leaned in to read it, and his face went pale. Tiffany grabbed the document, her voice trembling as she read it aloud. All remaining rights to the Langston name, patents, and intellectual property will be absorbed by Axion Systems and permanently retired. She stared at me, furious. You're not just buying the company. You're erasing it. I held her gaze, steady and unflinching. Yes. Langston Enterprises will never exist again. The name won't be revived. The legacy ends here. It'll disappear, just like you tried to make me disappear. My father clenched his jaw. You're doing this just to get back at us. I shook my head slowly. No. I'm doing this because some things don't deserve to be saved. This time, I picked up the pen and signed. Just like that, it was over. The Langston era ended in ink and silence. And with it gone, Axion Systems soared. With no competition from my father's failed empire, we grew faster than ever. We took over contracts that had once been Langston's pride. Their legacy was gone. Mine had only just begun. 5 months later, a letter arrived at my office. No return address. Just a single handwritten note inside. Grace, I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope one day you'll understand. Dad. I read it once. Then I tossed it into the fireplace. As the flames consumed the last trace of Langston Enterprises, I smiled. I had completely and unquestionably won. 5 months had passed since that final signature erased Langston Enterprises from existence. 5 months since my father and sister walked out of the boardroom with nothing. And for the first time since it all began, I felt true peace. Axion Systems was thriving. Without Langston in the picture, we had expanded aggressively. Every major client that had once been theirs was now ours. Revenue, $900 million. Market dominance, 70%. Status, unmatched. But it wasn't the numbers that made me proud. It was walking through my office each day and seeing a company built on merit. Employees who were there because of talent, not family ties. A business I had built from the ground up, on my own, without needing approval. Still, the past has a funny way of showing up when you least expect it. One afternoon, an envelope arrived, unmarked. Inside was a cream-colored invitation with gold lettering. The Langston Family Annual Gala. I had nearly forgotten about it. Every year, for as long as I could remember, my parents had hosted the most exclusive event in the industry, back when they still had power. This year, they weren't hosting it. Someone else was, someone who had bought their mansion at auction after the bankruptcy. The invitation wasn't intentional.
Just a formality.
Whoever sent it likely had no idea what that name meant to me. But instead of tossing it aside, I made a decision. I was going. Not for revenge. Not to prove anything. But to close the final chapter. The night of the gala, I stepped out of my car in a custom-tailored black gown. Confident.
Calm.
A woman who had nothing left to prove. The event was as glamorous as I remembered. Glittering chandeliers, soft music, a sea of champagne and expensive suits. But this time, everything had changed. I was the most powerful person in the room, and everyone knew it. As I walked through the entrance, whispers followed me like shadows. "Is that Grace Langston?" someone murmured. "No. She runs Axion Systems now." Didn't she take down her father's company? I ignored the chatter. I wasn't here for them. Then I saw them. My father and Tiffany. They weren't at the center of the crowd anymore. No important executives surrounded them. No million-dollar conversations. They stood off to the side, faded remnants of the people they used to be. My father looked smaller somehow. The authority he once carried was gone, replaced by something I never thought I'd see in him. Regret. Tiffany still stood tall, still tried to carry herself with confidence, but I saw the tension in her hands, the way she gripped her champagne glass too tightly, the flicker of nerves in her eyes when she spotted me. For the first time in our lives, I was the one with power. And they both knew it. I walked toward them slowly, each step echoing across the marble floor. Tiffany tensed. My father turned to face me, and for a brief moment, I saw it, defeat. "Grace," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I tilted my head. "Dad." A long silence passed.
He sighed.
"I suppose this is where you gloat." I gave a faint smile.
"No."
"This is where I say goodbye." Tiffany blinked.
"What?"
"I didn't come here to rub anything in your faces," I said, setting my drink on a nearby tray. "I didn't come to remind you of what you lost. That's not my concern anymore." I met my father's eyes, steady and calm. "For years, I tried to earn your approval. I worked myself to exhaustion just to prove I was enough." I took a deep breath. "But I don't need that anymore." I turned to Tiffany. "And I don't hate you. I never did. I pity you." Her eyes narrowed.
"Pity?" "Yes."
"Because unlike you, I didn't need to take power from anyone. I built my own." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, she had no words. I gave them both one last look. Then I walked away, not in anger, not for revenge, but because I was finally free. I left the gala without looking back. I didn't need to. I had nothing left to prove. This was never about revenge. It was about stepping into the person I was always meant to become. As I slid into my car, driving toward a company, a legacy, and a future that finally belonged to me, a smile formed on my lips. This wasn't the conclusion of my story. It was the start of something entirely new.